Imagine waking up to the sound of your city collapsing, your walls shaking from explosions beneath your feet, your enemies closing in from every direction. And the one army that could save you is still miles away, climbing a mountain no sane commander would ever attempt. Cut to close-up of tens of thousands of cavalrymen about to charge down from the mountaintop. But what happened next was something the world had never seen before. In the late summer of 1683, Europe was a land balancing on the edge of collapse. Kingdoms were fractured by decades of religious wars, alliances were unreliable, and the once mighty cities of the continent felt more like exhausted survivors than centers of power. And beyond the eastern horizon, an empire that had been expanding for centuries, one that had already swallowed the Balkans, Hungary, and parts of the Mediterranean, set its sights on the city that guarded the very heart of Europe, Vienna. If the city fell, nothing would stop the Ottoman war machine from sweeping into the German states, northern Italy, and perhaps even further west. Vienna was the hinge on which the entire future of Europe could swing or break. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. For months, whispers of an approaching storm drifted across the continent, but no one imagined its true scale until it was too late. When High Marshal Mustafa Kara arrived with a colossal army, over 150,000 soldiers, siege engineers, and artillery, the earth around Vienna seemed to tremble. The city's governor, Ernst Keller, watched from the walls as thousands of tents spread across the plains like a second city rising overnight. Inside the walls, fear settled just as quickly. Food stores were low, disease spread, and the relentless boom of Ottoman cannons shook homes, churches, and the morale of every last defender. Yet far to the north, in the halls of Krakow, one man read a desperate letter smuggled out of Vienna. General Marcus Sobell, the warrior king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, understood instantly what others hesitated to admit. This wasn't merely about protecting one city. If Vienna fell, a vacuum would open, one powerful enough to reshape the entire continent. Sobell had seen enough wars to recognize when history was shifting, and this time it was shifting fast. But helping Vienna meant navigating a fractured network of kingdoms that did not trust one another. Catholics mistrusted Protestants. Old grudges resurfaced. Many rulers preferred to watch from a distance rather than risk their armies. As diplomatic messages crossed borders, Sobell realized there was no time to wait for perfect unity. Vienna was losing ground every hour. People were starving. Walls were cracking. And the Ottomans were digging tunnels beneath the city, ready to blow open massive gaps in the defenses. Standing in the candlelit war room, Sobell looked at the map one more time. The distance was great. The terrain was brutal. The odds were terrible. But the choice was unmistakable. If Europe was going to survive, someone had to move first. Someone willing to stake everything on a march that could alter the fate of millions. And so, with a decision that would echo for centuries, Sobell ordered the army to saddle up. The ambition of Mustafa Kara. While Vienna strained under the relentless siege, far from the suffering inside the walls, High Marshal Mustafa Kara walked through his sprawling command tent like a man already crowned by destiny. The Ottoman Empire had produced powerful generals before, but Kara saw himself as something more. A figure chosen by fate to expand the empire's borders to the very center of Europe. In his mind, Vienna wasn't just another conquest. It was the conquest, the one that would place him alongside the greatest names in Ottoman history. His tent was a world unto itself. Thick carpets muffling the ground, bronze lanterns casting warm light over maps, and silk drapes swaying as officers entered and exited with a mix of respect and fear. Outside, drums pounded in steady rhythm, while tens of thousands of soldiers prepared for the next stage of the siege. Yet the only sound that truly mattered to Mustafa Kara was the one in his own mind, the whisper of ambition telling him he was on the verge of greatness. But greatness has a way of clouding judgment. Several of his senior commanders, battle-hardened men who had seen the empire rise and falter, warned him during strategy meetings. They pointed to long supply lines, the early arrival of autumn rains, and the growing number of Christian forces rallying to Vienna's defense. Reports from scouts mentioned movement in the north, signs of an army far larger than expected. Kara dismissed them with a wave. They are fractured. They will not unite, he said confidently, pacing around the table. Europe is a house divided. They lack the courage to walk into the fire. To him, the siege wasn't a gamble. It was a coronation ceremony waiting to happen. All he had to do was apply pressure until Vienna cracked. He believed the city was already at its breaking point, and in many ways he was right. The walls were crumbling, morale was collapsing, and hunger gnawed at defenders day and night. But Kara's fatal mistake wasn't misreading Vienna. It was misreading the world beyond it. Every advisor who urged caution was met with the same sharp response. Do you want to be remembered as the man who hesitated, or the man who finished what our empire began a century ago? Still, late at night, when the noise of the camp died down and he was left alone with the flickering glow of his lantern, even Kara felt a faint tension beneath his confidence. He would approach the map table, tracing the distance between Vienna and Krakow with his finger. The path was long, but not impossible. News had come that the Polish king, Marcus Sobell, was meeting with German and Austrian commanders. But instead of fear, Kara felt irritation. They are too slow, he murmured. They will debate and argue. They cannot march quickly enough to matter. He convinced himself that unity among European powers was a fantasy, something incapable of manifesting before Vienna collapsed. And so he doubled down. He ordered more mines dug beneath the city walls, more artillery rolling into position, and more pressure applied to the defenders. He wanted Vienna exhausted, broken, kneeling. The truth he refused to see was simple. Every day he tightened the noose around Vienna, he also tightened the thread that pulled Sobell and the European coalition closer together. And when ambition blinds a man, he rarely notices the shadows gathering on the horizon. The call for help across Europe. News of Vienna's suffering moved slowly at first, carried by terrified refugees, whispered by merchants, then finally delivered by desperate riders who slipped through Ottoman lines under the cover of darkness. Each message carried the same haunting refrain. Vienna cannot hold much longer. But messages alone did not guarantee salvation. Europe was a continent wounded by old rivalries, religious fractures, and political distrust. If salvation was coming, it would not come easily. In the fortified heart of Krakow, General Marcus Sobell received a letter that chilled him more than any winter wind. It was written by Governor Ernst Keller himself, the ink shaky, the words bleeding with urgency. He described the collapsing walls, the starving civilians, the relentless Ottoman mines that threatened to blow the city open from beneath. Keller did not plead. He warned. If we fall, the way to the German states will lie open. Austria will break. Bavaria will burn. And Europe will stand alone against a storm it cannot stop. Sobell read the letter twice. Then he folded it slowly, feeling the weight of a continent settling onto his shoulders. He had always known the Ottomans were bold, but this siege that reached the center of Europe was something different. It was a message, and the message was simple. No one is safe. He called for his war council. Polish generals gathered in the echoing chamber, their armor clinking as they took their seats. Maps unfurled across the table. Vienna, the Danube, Carpathian passes, and the long stretch of land between Krakow and the besieged city. Yet strategy was only half the problem. The real obstacle was politics. Austria and Poland had long been rivals. German princes distrusted Catholic monarchs. Protestant cities wanted guarantees. Every alliance was tangled in conditions, grudges, and old wounds. Sobell's advisors reminded him of all of it. Your Majesty, if we march alone, we risk annihilation. The German states will not commit without months of negotiations. Austrians will demand command authority. They will never accept you leading the coalition. Sobell listened, his jaw tightening, eyes fixed on the map. While we argue, he said, Vienna dies. A silence fell across the room. Everyone understood the stakes. Without Vienna, Europe's defensive shield would collapse. Yet no one wanted to be the first to risk their army. So Sobell decided to act. He dispatched envoys to German princes, to Austrian commanders still outside Vienna, to anyone with troops and a sense of survival. The responses trickled back in waves, hesitant at first, then firmer as reality sank in. The Ottoman Empire was not a rumor. It was at Europe's doorstep. Still, even as alliances began forming, Sobell knew time was running out. He had seen Ottoman sieges before. He knew how quickly walls could crumble once the miners reached their final chambers beneath the city. One night, standing alone in the high tower of Wawel Castle, Sobell looked out over the darkened city. Krakow was peaceful, quiet, unthreatened, but he could almost hear the distant rumble of cannons miles away, feel the urgency building like a storm. Keller's final sentence echoed in his mind. If help does not come within weeks, perhaps days, we are lost. Sobell clenched the letter in his fist. We will not stand by while a city burns, he whispered to himself. Not Vienna, not Europe. The next morning, he made the decision that would redefine his legacy. Before every alliance was fully secured, before every contract was signed or guarantee exchanged, he issued the order, prepare the army. We march for Vienna. His generals exchanged uneasy glances. Some feared the distance. Others feared the Ottomans. But none doubted Sobell's resolve. Once he made a decision, the earth itself would struggle to move him. Across Europe, the message spread like wildfire. The Polish king is marching. And something remarkable began to happen. Cities that had hesitated now sent troops. German princes grudgingly agreed to join. Even factions that could barely stand each other found common ground in the simple fact that annihilation was a powerful motivator. A fractured continent was beginning to unite. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but unite nonetheless. And as the first divisions of Sobell's army moved out, their boots striking the earth in steady rhythm, one truth settled across the land. This was no longer just Vienna's fight. It was Europe's, the march of the alliance. The morning General Marcus Sobell's army began its march, the air over Krakow felt charged, as if the city itself understood the weight of the decision. Blacksmiths hammered the final horseshoes. Quartermasters strapped barrels of grain, powder, and water onto wooden wagons. Priests moved through the camp offering blessings. No one said it aloud, but every soldier knew the truth. They were marching toward a storm none of them had ever seen before. The route to Vienna was long, stretching across mountains, forests, and plains, each mile filled with uncertainty. As the army advanced, dust rose behind them like a banner announcing their resolve. Scouts rode ahead in swift waves, signaling safe passages or warning of obstacles. Drums kept a steady rhythm that echoed across valleys. And everywhere Sobell rode, men straightened their backs, standing a little taller at the sight of their commander. The early days went smoothly. Civilians lined the roads to offer bread, water, or simply silent prayers. But as the army pressed deeper into the Carpathian region, the terrain turned unforgiving. Rocky passes jutted like jagged teeth. Narrow trails offered room for only a single wagon at a time. Horses slipped. Wheels broke. Progress slowed. In the evenings, Sobell met with his officers inside a makeshift tent glowing from lantern light. Maps covered the table, their edges curling from the dampness. The biggest question looming over every conversation was the same. Should they wait for more allies, or push forward alone? General Reinhardt, commanding a German contingent still days away, sent messengers urging patience. Give us time, one letter read, and we will meet you with strength. Austrian commanders echoed the same plea. Delay, coordinate, prepare. But Vienna didn't have time. Reports from surviving couriers painted a grim picture. Walls crumbling, morale breaking, ammunition dwindling. The Ottomans were detonating mines that blew entire sections of defense sky-high. Every hour of delay drew Vienna closer to the edge. One night, the debate peaked. Inside Sobell's tent, voices rose. We can't advance without the German brigades, one officer argued. We barely have half the coalition assembled. And if we wait? Sobell asked quietly. Then we march with overwhelming force. Overwhelming force? Sobell repeated. Won't matter if Vienna is already ashes. Silence stretched across the tent. Everyone knew he was right. After the meeting dissolved, Sobell stepped outside, breathing in the cold mountain air. The moon cast faint silver across the landscape, illuminating the vast line of soldiers sleeping under makeshift shelters. He could hear the distant clang of a sentry adjusting his armor, the low murmur of horses shifting in their pens. War was rarely peaceful, but tonight, briefly, it almost felt like it. He thought of Keller's letter. He thought of Vienna's starving families. He thought of the world that would follow if they failed. By dawn, his decision was made. At sunrise, he summoned his officers. As the first rays of light cut through the mist, Sobell planted his gauntlet hand on the table and declared, "We do not wait. We march now." Some officers exchanged worried glances, but none dared challenge him. The order spread through the camp like fire. Soldiers roused themselves, tightening straps, sharpening blades, fastening armor. The camp's sleepy stillness erupted into coordinated motion. What they lacked in perfect numbers they made up for in speed, and speed might be the only thing Vienna had left. As the army descended the Carpathian trails into the vast Austrian plains, they were joined by smaller groups of Allied reinforcements. Bands of German infantry, Austrian cavalry, and volunteers who had traveled days just to join the cause. The coalition was still incomplete, but it was growing. More importantly, the sight of different nations marching side by side stirred something powerful in the men. Old rivalries didn't vanish, but they mattered less with each step toward Vienna. By the time they reached Tulln, just northwest of the besieged city, the alliance had become something real. Still fragile, still strained, but united under a single goal: save Vienna or die trying. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the Danube, Sobell surveyed the horizon. Smoke billowed from the distant skyline. Even from miles away, the faint thunder of Ottoman cannons rolled through the air. Vienna was still fighting, but it would not last much longer. Sobell tightened his grip on the reins. "Faster," he murmured. "We're almost out of time." The mountain ridge advantage. As the coalition army neared Vienna, the land transformed from open fields to the rugged shoulders of the Kahlenberg Ridge. The mountains loomed like ancient guardians, carved by centuries of wind and war. But for Marcus Sobell, these jagged heights were more than scenery, they were an opportunity. And perhaps the last one he would ever get. Scouts returned at dawn with news that startled even the most seasoned commanders. The Ottomans had left the ridge virtually unguarded. Their attention was fixed entirely on the plains below, where the bulk of their siege lines encircled Vienna. To them, the mountain was a natural barrier, too steep, too dense, too unlikely as an approach for a massive army. But to Sobell, that assumption was precisely the weakness he needed. He stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, boots grinding into loose gravel, morning mist brushing his cloak. Below him, fires from the Ottoman encampment flickered like a sea of restless stars. Drums thudded, cannons echoed, and the faint cries of Vienna's defenders carried through the wind. The siege was tightening. If they didn't strike soon, there would be nothing left to save. General Halbrecht, one of the German commanders, rode up beside him. "You're thinking of taking the ridge, aren't you?" he asked. Sobell didn't answer immediately. He studied the terrain, narrow switchback paths, thick forests, and razor-sharp slopes. Moving tens of thousands of men, artillery, and cavalry across such treacherous ground would be slow, exhausting, risky. If the Ottomans discovered their maneuver, they could trap the entire coalition force on the mountainside, turning the rescue mission into a massacre. "It's insanity," Halbrecht said. "No army our size has ever attempted a mountain assault like this." Sobell finally turned to him, eyes hard with determination. "That's why it will work." Word of the plan spread quickly through the command ranks, triggering a storm of arguments. Austrian officers feared disaster. German strategists warned that even reaching the ridge would drain the men's strength before the real battle began. A Polish captain described the route as a staircase built by the devil. But Sobell silenced them with a single question. "Would you rather fight them where they expect us, or where they cannot defend?" Silence. Reluctant, Uneasy silence. By midday, officers began relaying the order. The ridge must be taken. The ascent began at first light. Thousands of soldiers moved like a giant shadow weaving upward through the forest. Leaves whispered underfoot. Horses snorted, struggling against the incline. Wagons creaked, slipping on loose stones. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became, biting at armor and exposed skin. Sobell rode near the front, guiding his men through each twisting path. Sweat trickled down their faces despite the chill. More than once, a horse lost its footing and tumbled, echoing down the slopes until the forest swallowed the sound. But slowly, painfully, they rose above the world below. From the higher vantage points, Vienna came into view. A battered, desperate city clinging to life. Smoke curled from broken rooftops. The walls were pockmarked by cannon fire. Even at a distance, the devastation was visible. It fueled the soldiers' resolve. When they reached the summit plateau, they found what Sobell had hoped for. A wide, open stretch of land overlooking the Ottoman flank. The perfect staging ground. The perfect angle of attack. From here, they could descend upon the enemy like a thunderstorm breaking loose. And the Ottomans had no idea. In the camp below, High Marshal Mustafa Kara was preparing for what he believed would be the final blow against Vienna. He walked confidently between his tents, oblivious to the army assembling high above his head. Silent, determined, and fueled by desperation. Sobell's commanders gathered around him on the ridge, wind tugging at their cloaks. Some were pale from the climb, others from the realization of what this meant. At dawn, Sobell said, we strike. Albrecht swallowed hard. This will be the largest downhill assault in history. Sobell nodded. And the last chance Vienna has. As night settled over the ridge, tens of thousands of soldiers camped beneath the open sky. They polished armor, whispered prayers, sharpened blades. Hussar cavalry adjusted their famed wings, the metal feathers glinting in the moonlight. Every man felt the pressure of the coming day. One battle that would decide not just victory or defeat, but the fate of an entire continent. And as Sobell stood overlooking the trembling sea of Ottoman campfires below, he whispered into the wind, you cannot fear the impossible. You must become it. The turning point before the final charge. The night before the battle was eerily calm. The coalition army lay stretched across the Kahlenberg Ridge, an ocean of armor and determination under the watchful moon. The fires crackled softly, horses shifted restlessly, and somewhere far below, Vienna groaned under the relentless pounding of Ottoman cannons. Every distant boom was a reminder. Time was up. General Marcus Sobell stood a short distance from camp, silhouetted against the glow of lanterns. He watched as Vienna flickered, tiny pockets of light gutted by shadow, like a candle struggling to survive a storm. The city had held longer than anyone believed possible, but it was now at the brink. If they waited any longer, the final Ottoman mines would detonate, ripping open Vienna's last defenses. Behind Sobell, footsteps approached. It was Father Adrian, the army chaplain. They're scared, he said quietly. Sobell didn't turn. They should be. Fear can break men. Fear, Sobell replied, can also sharpen them. It was the closest he would come to admitting what weighed on his mind. His men were exhausted from the mountain climb. The coalition was a mosaic of different languages, rivalries, and grudges barely held in check. And the Ottoman army still outnumbered them by tens of thousands. But none of that mattered anymore. The moment had come. At dawn, Sobell summoned his commanders to a clearing overlooking the plains. The sun's first rays cut through the fog, illuminating the vast Ottoman encampment like a stage set for the apocalypse. Thousands of tents spread across the valley. Siege towers loomed. Cannons glinted silver. The rhythmic beat of Ottoman drums carried upward on the wind. Mustafa Kara was preparing to deliver the final blow. Sobell pointed to the enemy formations, his voice steady. They think we're still forming. They think we're still days away. They do not know we are standing above them right now. A murmur ran through the officers. General Halbrecht studied the valley carefully. If we strike too early, they'll regroup. Too late, Vienna falls. We have one window. Sobell nodded. And it's today. Below them, the first stages of the Ottoman attack took shape. Waves of infantry advanced toward Vienna's battered gates. Cannon fire intensified. Smoke thickened. From the walls, defenders fought desperately, but their lines wavered like worn threads ready to snap. The coalition officers exchanged grim looks. "We attack when their attention is fully on the city," Sobell said. "When their lines stretch, when their generals believe victory is guaranteed." He paused. And not a moment sooner, troops rushed to readiness. Armor was fastened, muskets primed, standards raised. Hussars tightened straps around their winged frames, the metal feathers clinking faintly, like the sound of fate sharpening its blade. But beneath the momentum was a current of unease. A young Austrian officer approached Sobell. "Sir, with respect, what if we fail?" Sobell met the young man's eyes. "Then Europe falls, so we do not fail." Simple words, terrifying truth. By midday, the coalition infantry was positioned along the ridgeline, hidden among trees and brush. Artillery units wheeled into place behind them, aiming downward at the heart of the Ottoman camp. Cavalry assembled further back, rows upon rows of horses snorting clouds of steam into the cold air. A steady breeze lifted Sobell's cloak. This was the moment. The coalition guns fired the first volley, the sound ripping through the sky. The mountains answered with thunderous echoes. Ottoman soldiers below froze in shock as explosions tore through their forward camps. Confusion spread instantly. "Advance!" Sobell roared. German and Austrian infantry surged down the slopes, muskets flashing, bayonets glinting. The Ottomans spun to face the unexpected attack, their once perfect formation buckling as chaos spread. Mustafa Kara's lieutenants shouted conflicting orders. The mountain assault had blindsided them. Sobell watched the unfolding battle like a chessboard on fire. The infantry was pushing forward, but the Ottomans were rallying faster than expected. Their superior numbers began tightening into counterlines. This was the razor's edge he had anticipated. Halbrecht galloped to Sobell's side. "They're stabilizing. If they regroup—" "I know," Sobell said. His eyes hardened. "It's almost time. Time for the moment the world would remember. The moment the mountain trembled. The moment 20,000 cavalry would descend like a divine hammer. But not yet. Not until every second tilted the battlefield toward their favor." Sobell gripped the reins of his horse, heart pounding like war drums. "Hold," he whispered. "Just a little longer." The fate of Vienna, and all of Europe, hung on those final breaths before the storm. The greatest cavalry charge in history. The battlefield trembled long before the horses moved. It began as a vibration underfoot, soft, subtle, like the earth drawing a breath. Then it grew, rolling through the soil, rattling shield and armor alike. Ottoman soldiers paused, stunned. For a moment, even the relentless thunder of cannons seemed to fade beneath the rising pulse of something deeper, something ancient, something terrifying. On the Kahlenberg ridge above, 20,000 cavalry formed into lines that stretched farther than the eye could follow. Standards whipped in the wind. Lances angled toward the sky like a forest of steel. Sunlight glinted off armor and helmets, dancing across the wings of the famed Polish hussars. Two arches of metal feathers fixed behind their saddles, shimmering like the plumage of war gods. At the very front sat General Marcus Sobell. He tightened his grip around his reins, feeling the tremor of his warhorse beneath him. The animal sensed what was coming. Every soldier did. This wasn't merely a charge. It was the moment that separated the living from legend. Below them, the Ottomans scrambled. Commanders shouted contradictory orders. Infantry turned toward the ridge, unsure whether the strange thunder was natural or man-made. Mustafa Kara stood in the middle of his command camp, staring upward, disbelief cutting across his face. "They wouldn't dare," he whispered, "but they would." And they did. Sobell lowered his saber. "Ride!" The ridge exploded. 20,000 horses surged forward in a single, unified roar. Trees whipped past as the cavalry hurtled downhill, picking up impossible speed. Hooves slammed into the earth like rolling thunder. Dust and debris shot upward in spiraling clouds. The wings of the hussars hissed and clattered, creating a haunting metallic scream that echoed across the valley. A sound whispered about in legends but rarely heard by the living. To the Ottomans, it looked like the mountain itself had broken loose. Their front lines buckled instantly. Soldiers who had fought for months with unshakable discipline now stumbled back in pure fear. Arrows flew upward in panicked volleys, but the distance was too short now, far too short. Sobell led the charge straight into the heart of the Ottoman right flank. The impact was cataclysmic. Horses shattered spear walls. Lances pierced armor. The coalition cavalry smashed through the lines as if they were made of reeds. The first wave broke open an enormous gap. The second wave widened it. The third transformed the entire flank into a swirling catastrophe. Mustafa Kara watched in horror as his army disintegrated. He screamed for the Janissaries, the elite infantry, his last hope. They formed a defensive block, shields raised, muskets firing. But they were too few, too late, and too overwhelmed. Sobell's hussars crashed into them with the full weight of the ridge behind them, splintering the formation and scattering the survivors. Everywhere, chaos replaced command. Ottoman cavalry fled. Infantry threw down shields. Siege engineers abandoned their posts. The vast, disciplined war machine that had dominated Europe for centuries collapsed under the pressure of one impossible charge. Sobell pushed deeper into the heart of the Ottoman camp, his saber flashing with each strike. Around him, the coalition forces roared with renewed fury, their morale surging like wildfire. This was the moment they had climbed the mountain for. This was the moment they had starved, marched, and bled for. And Vienna saw it. From the crumbling walls came a cheer that carried across the battlefield, the sound of a dying city realizing it would live. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the Ottoman lines had shattered. Mustafa Kara fled. The siege was broken. The charge had ended not just a battle but an era. And history would remember this day as the greatest cavalry charge ever unleashed upon the earth. The fall of ambition and the salvation of a continent. When the dust finally settled over the plains outside Vienna, the battlefield looked like the aftermath of a storm that had ripped through the earth itself. Tents were torn apart, weapons scattered like broken branches, and the once imposing Ottoman camp lay in shambles. Smoke drifted upward in thin, defeated wisps. The silence that followed was almost surreal after hours of thunderous chaos. For the first time in months, Vienna could breathe. From the battered city walls, defenders stared in disbelief at the retreating Ottoman forces. Many of them had fought until they could no longer lift a sword. They had watched their city crumble piece by piece, convinced each sunrise would be their last. But now, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the plains, they saw the impossible. An army that had come to destroy them was now running for its life. Inside the city, bells rang. Hesitant at first, then wildly, desperately, joyfully. Civilians emerged from cellars and shattered buildings. Some fell to their knees. Others clung to each other, weeping. To them, salvation had not come from within their walls, but from the horizon, from the ridge where the cavalry had descended like judgment from heaven. General Marcus Sobell rode slowly across the ruined battlefield. He was exhausted, bloodied, and sore from the violent shock of the charge. His horse moved carefully over broken earth and scattered shields. Around him, coalition soldiers cheered, embraced, or simply collapsed in relief. Passing Austrian infantry saluted him with tear-filled eyes. "You saved us," one whispered. Sobell shook his head. "No, we saved each other." He meant it, because this victory wasn't his alone. It belonged to every German soldier who held the line on the ridge, every Austrian who stood against impossible odds, every Polish hussar whose wings cut through the battlefield like lightning. For once, a fractured Europe had united not out of convenience, but out of necessity. And that unity had altered the course of history. Meanwhile, miles away, High Marshal Mustafa Kara galloped through the chaos of retreat. His cloak torn, his horse foaming at the mouth, he refused to look back. But he didn't need to. He knew what he would see. The shattered remnants of an army that had once been unstoppable. For months, he had believed victory was inevitable. For weeks, he had seen Vienna as a jewel waiting to be plucked. But ambition had clouded his judgment. Pride had deafened him to warnings. And when the mountain thundered with hooves, he finally understood the truth. He had not lost a battle. He had lost an empire's dream. The Ottoman retreat soon became a rout. Soldiers scattered into the woods, abandoned artillery, or fled across the Danube. Word of the defeat would travel swiftly to the Sultan in Istanbul, and with it, the blame. Kara's career, legacy, and life would end not on a battlefield, but by the cold hands of political retribution. As night fell, Sobell entered Vienna through a shattered gate. The people gathered around him in overwhelming gratitude. Children stared at the hussars with wide-eyed awe. Priests offered blessings. Civilians pressed food, flowers, anything they could into the hands of the weary soldiers. Governor Ernst Keller, bruised and bone-tired, approached Sobell and bowed. "You didn't just save Vienna," he said softly. "You saved Europe." Sobell looked up at the cracked towers, the crumbled homes, the smoke drifting into the night sky. "Cities can be rebuilt," he replied. "But hope must be protected." Later, standing atop the remnants of Vienna's wall, Sobell surveyed the city he had arrived just in time to save. Fires smoldered. Buildings leaned precariously. But everywhere he looked, he saw life stirring again. People sweeping debris. Families reunited. Soldiers tending to the wounded. Vienna had endured the unendurable. He took a slow breath. This victory would not end all wars. It would not erase centuries of conflict. But it would stand as a reminder, etched deeply into Europe's memory, of what could be achieved when nations looked beyond their differences and fought side by side. Because on that day, on that ridge, at that impossible moment, unity had defeated ambition. And a continent had been given a future. The Battle of Vienna isn't just a story about armies and empires. It's a lesson about human behavior, leadership, and what happens when ambition collides with unity. On one side, you have Mustafa Kara, a man convinced that destiny guaranteed his victory. He saw warnings as obstacles, advice as weakness, and time as something he controlled. His downfall reminds us of a universal truth. Ambition without humility becomes blindness. It destroys more than it builds. On the opposite end stands General Marcus Sobell, who understood that leadership is not about power but responsibility. He marched not for glory, territory, or revenge. He marched because people were dying, a continent was crumbling, and someone had to act. His decision to climb the impossible ridge reflects a powerful message for today. The path forward is rarely the easy one, but often the one others fear to take. There's also a broader lesson about unity. Europe at the time was fractured: religion, politics, borders, grudges. But in the face of a threat larger than any single kingdom, those fractures didn't matter. What mattered was survival, purpose, and the courage to stand together when all logic said it was too late. In our modern world, politically divided, socially polarized, and often guided by short-term interests, the Battle of Vienna reminds us that great victories happen when unlikely allies choose collaboration over conflict. When individuals put aside ego to confront something bigger than themselves. History doesn't just tell us what happened. It tells us what we must do when our moment arrives. If the story moved you, inspired you, or surprised you, then don't let it end here. Hit like to support the channel, comment to tell us what moment shocked you the most, and subscribe so you never miss the next story we bring to life. Your engagement helps us reach more viewers who love history told in a bold, cinematic way. Before you go, here's a question for you. Do you think Europe would have survived if the cavalry hadn't charged that day? Drop your thoughts below. We read every comment, and your perspective might shape the next video. And if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love tomorrow's story. A battle where a single mistake, one arrow fired at the wrong time, changed the fate of an empire forever. Stay tuned. Your next journey through history begins soon.